So, without further ado, Mr. Wes Nalders.
Thank you, Amy, for the introduction, and yes, and Joel for the looking after us tonight as far as the meal and so on. It's marvellous, and I can't believe there's so many people come to a meeting. It's incredible. Good to see Simon round again after 30 years. He navigated for us in a old BP run back in '89 with my son and myself, and oh, he's got the cup to prove it. Look at that there. Hold it up, Simon. There it is. Yeah. And we come third, I think, which was a pretty good effort, and just showed us how good a navigator he was. Yeah, my history is probably not any greater than quite a few people here, and including someone we didn't catch up with, Bob Watson. In my day, he was one of the chiefs, and I was always one of the Indians, making the chiefs look good by following them around, you know, in 35th place and 38th place and this sort of thing. And these other fellas, with the factory assistants, were right up the front, and some of them were my idols. Got to know quite a few of them over the years, but and it's only in later years that I was lucky enough to get some very efficient navigators and co-drivers, and we started to get up near the front, which was quite a thrill for a bushwhacker like myself that competed for many years without a lot of success. I know when I first got my licence, I went to the police station in Stawell, 27th of October 1937, see my memory's not too bad, and got my licence and had my little 8 horsepower soft top Anglia, entered in the Begonia Rally in Ballarat, and that started the rot then. Number 7 on the door in masking tape, and I thought it was the flashiest looking rally car you've ever seen. But anyway, now I've got just talking to Tom down here, who's also got a Toyota 700, and I think the Anglia, 8 horsepower Anglia, had actually beat the little 700 off the mark. And I'm looking for a wheel cap too. Tom thinks he might be able to find me a wheel cap for it. Yes, thank you to my wife for coming along, and my beautiful granddaughter Tyrion and Mitchell, who drove us through all this city traffic and rain and mist and so on. I don't know how you people put up with it, but you've got to get a medal for living down here, sure. I'll give you all one. Anyway, getting on to a bit of history, which is why I'm here. I thought I'd perhaps fill you in a bit on the London to Sydney. I took the Toyota Car Club of Australia last night, and they were mostly interested in Repco, so we talked quite a bit about that. And so I'll probably just mention a little bit. It's pretty hard to fit 30,000 and 20,000 kilometres into 4 hours, I think Joel said I had to do, but I'll try. He's got a baseball bat here. He's going to stop me soon. So, yeah, the 77 was the London to Sydney, as some of you may remember, although it's 40 odd years ago now. And I remember reading about it in the Motor Magazine and the old Toyota business. We had the Toyota dealership in Stawell, I might mention, and my dad started that with Fords early on, and then we went into Toyota. And that was a means of me being able to rally and race cars as well, and because I was able to book up all my expenses, and as I was telling Joel, my dad would tell me to pay for them every end of every financial year. Pay for them, son, or and don't book, I'll wipe them off this year, but pay for them so I don't have to do it again next year. Next year he'd come and say, son, I don't want you to book up. Anyway, without his help, of course, on apprentice's wage, £3.15 a week, it was pretty difficult to race and so on. But anyway, we did it with his help and the garage's help, working till midnight nearly every night on the cars to get them going, and the old Sloper Ford that used to tow the cars around. And I think I had 7 motors in 9 months at one stage. When the farmers would bring their F500s into trucks to get Repco motor, I'd grab the old one and stick it in the old Ford. which wasn't very successful, but I'd get a couple of meetings out of it. Anyway, getting back to the rallying, yes, it come along, so I rang the Wilton Dixon, his phone number was in this motor magazine, and I said, look, I've read about it, I want you to send me all the particulars. He said, oh, well, I'll do that. I said, gee, you don't sound very happy. He said, no, it's 3 o'clock on a bloody morning here in London, he said. I said, oh, sorry, never even thought about that. Anyway, I asked a local school teacher to come with me as navigator, who became quite famous in the finish, a fella called Noel Richards, who navigated for me from right through that trip, and then diverting a bit. 2 years later, we entered in the Repco Rally, and Noel and his brother Ian were going to come with me. General Motors rang up about a month before the rally and said, we want Noel to go with Peter Brock in the Holden dealer team. So, of course, there was no contest from my point of view. I told him he'd be mad to knock that back, and he actually won it with Peter Brock, as you might remember, in the Commodore. So I still had Ian and a chap called Jeff Boyd from Ballarat, who was an excellent navigator. Simon would probably know him. Yeah, and the only thing with Jeff, he's a good sport, we found he had terrible BO, and we bought about 24 cans of underarm deodorant spray, and every time Jeff would go, oh, Jeff, oh, sorry fellas, he'd say, sorry fellas. It wasn't deliberate, it was some sort of problem, but anyway, that was a minor thing, and I'm sure Jeff wouldn't mind me saying that. He's a great bloke. So now I'm going to slip back to onto the Repco. So I entered a Corolla in the London Sydney because I looked at the entries that they had, and I reasoned that the only chance we had of winning anything was to try and win the class, and there were no real good drivers, none of the professionals, none of the factory teams that entered in their under 1200cc class, I think it was, or under 1000. So I thought that's our best chance, and Toyota didn't support motorsport in those days, even though I knew the general manager well, as everybody did in those early days of Toyota. You could ring him up and talk to him personally. Imagine doing it now, but he's a great bloke. And he had a marvellous story to tell of his war experiences too. Unfortunately, he's passed away now, but Mel was a great fellow, and so I chased all the dealers around the city and in the country, because you got to know them all at your conferences down here at Port Melbourne when you came down, and I managed to drag $4,400 in sponsorship out of them, and our budget I'd worked out was $14,000 for the 30,000 kilometres and the 6 weeks. And of course you've got to think, now you're talking 40 odd years ago, so I'm not sure what it'll be equivalent to now, maybe, 100,000 or something. Anyway, it was a fair bit for a small country dealership, but we'd had a few good years, and we were averaging 22% of the market install, which did make Toyota look at us quite kindly in a lot of ways. So I thought, well, we can afford that perhaps, and if we win the class, well, Toyota might come to the party, and there's a little bit of prize money involved. So away we went, bought the car in England. A cousin of mine lived over there who used to do a bit of rallying here in Victoria when he lived here previously, a fellow called Ian Nalders, a cousin, and so he picked the car up over there, organised to buy it there because to save the freight, and it was a little bit different to the local models in that it had twin carburettors. That was about all. It was a coupe. I wanted a solid body so it could take a bit of knocking around. He picked it up. Noel and I went over a fortnight before, finished it off. Got a, an aeroplane tank, one of those soft ones from up north of... and put in the boot, 35 gallons, I think it was, 35 gallons. Anyway, took up most of the boot and fitted the rally seats, and I'll have to hurry along a bit. and off we went from Covent Gardens. There was about 15 cars in our class, including one fella called Hans Solstrup, who you may have heard of, world adventurer and a pretty hopeless rally driver, but he was in a mini moke, mind you, and he had a Leyland Terrier truck following as a service vehicle. You weren't allowed to have service vehicles following you. They had to be entered in the rally. So they had to be a competitor to be able to help. And then, of course, that's pretty hard because you're way ahead or they're way ahead or roundabout. But in retrospect, the Leyland Terrier beat him home. It lost less points than what Hans did. Anyway, and another one was an MG Magenta, I think it was. They had a big ramp at the start at Covent Gardens in London, and there was a lot of people around. And this poor old MG couldn't get up the blinking ramp. It blew a head gasket on the way into the start, so he was out. So anyway, we and of course, as you folk do a lot of rallying, as I've heard, and it's a bit more complicated than it used to be. You know, we had overalls on and no helmets or anything in those days. And you could go, I think it was roughly 70 hours at a time. And as I said earlier, mentioned, after London, Sydney, with only two of us, I'd never ever go on a long distance event without at least three people. It makes it a lot easier. And as in the Round Australia trial, we had three of us and it was so much easier. One could be having a 2-hour kip while the other two were doing the work. Whereas we had terrible trouble staying awake, particularly when you go through Afghanistan and around those places when it was 100, 110, 15 degrees outside temperature, and dehydration was a terrible problem. Still, I won't go too much into that. So we get to Athens the first night. We caught a ship, a ferry from Sheerness, which is a south-eastern side of England, across to Vlissingen in Holland. Then we did a trip down to Amsterdam. We had a 2-hour break in Amsterdam. Then wandered across to Paris. I've got it all written down here, but it'd probably take too long to read it all out, the times and the distances and so on, but roughly 1,500 to 3,000 kilometres between stops. We had 5 hours in Paris. Noel attended the paperwork. I grabbed a taxi and had a look at the Eiffel Tower and Notre Dame and a few places because I didn't think I'd ever be there again. But strangely enough, I was back there 2 years later in a rally that went right around the Mediterranean through Europe and North Africa with a mate that I got to know in the London to Sydney, a fella called George Harris. And you might have seen trucks running around, perhaps Harris Farm Markets. They had 22 of them spread throughout New South Wales, and George was a millionaire at that stage. Not that I knew, but he didn't. You'd never think he was. He was a crude, big noter, but I just liked him when I first met him. But after going in this rally with him, I got to know him pretty well, and we become pretty good friends. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. But that's sidetracking a bit. So we get Paris, then we headed off across to through the Mont Blanc tunnel into Italy. Was it? Finished up in Athens for the next stop. So it's about 4,000, I think, 4,500 k, with special stages intermingled. People were still all starting to have trouble even then, even in Amsterdam, after just probably 2,000 or 1,000 kilometres of wiring where they run through the firewall. They didn't put rubber grommets and there was fires. And one Fiat 1100, I think it was, turned up with a big dent in the bonnet where the struts were coming up through the... They put too heavy a shockers on. You know, everything's got to be solid in a rally. You know, you've got to have this and that. And you've got spares on the roof, which you're going to lose within about 500 kilometres and all that sort of thing. And so people were dropping by the wayside, and I hadn't even struck much sort of hard hard work at that point. So we got to Yugoslavia, and that's where the really rough stuff started. And we did a goat track from one side of the mountain up over the top and down the other side. That was the start of the real tough stuff. We tiptoed pretty carefully. You know, the rock's about a foot in size, and I'd say it had only been used by maybe a horse and dray or something. But it was a good test. I think it was about 90k or something, and you had about an hour and a half. So we've probably dropped a few minutes there, and I've got a few things here to show you. The instructions were probably interesting, and that's where I first run into Hans Solstrup, because he was seated below us, and he was pulled up at the end of that control. I pulled up and said, "Oh, got a problem, Hans? Can I help you at all?" No, we're right. No, we're just having a cigarette. No, it's okay. And we found out later that all his engine mounts were broken and the engine was sitting down on the chassis. So again, it happened again in India, probably a week, 2 weeks later. He was pulled up beside the road, and we pulled up, so there was two legs sticking out from underneath the car, his navigator. "Give you a hand, Hans, at all? You want to tow or anything?" No, we're right. I think they'd broken a transmission or something, and there was oil running out everywhere, but no, he wouldn't take any help. But he was waiting for this Leyland Terrier, which was probably far ahead of him at that stage. Some of the instructions, they're fairly, here's the main one. This one says London to Madras, and it's all done by diagrams. So it's fairly self-explanatory, even though you can't tell what the names are. You can see it on the same thing on the signpost. And particularly in Europe, you're a hero. The police, you come to a city, there's traffic everywhere, and the police would be holding up the traffic and wave you through. Red lights, didn't matter, they'd wave you through. Whereas in Australia, you know what you're like when you're driving around, you're fast on a Sunday afternoon in a rally. You don't want to hear what people tell you. So that's the route instructions. From that, I think that one goes from London to Madras in India. Yes. So I better carry on with the directions. So we finished up, and there's so many things that happen in rallies like this, that particularly with other people, or as well as with other people, that you could write a book on their stories as well. In fact, this George Harris, who I didn't know until later, as I say, I've got to know him very well. We did 2 trips to the Himalayas, Himalayan Rally in India together, one in that Celica and one in the one that Bob, now Amy, bought from us. And I hope it gets back to the same stage it was. It certainly got the potential. I just wish I'd got in 10 minutes before him on that website. But anyway, I was disappointed to see vehicles sold subject to finance coming through, subject to payment, and I thought, damn it. Anyway, he's probably got more time than I have to do it now anyway, and energy. George was in the Citroen with Citroen wagon and he was someone asked him very late if he could fill in for someone who'd pulled out, and he did. He'd never done any rallying, and they had a broken studs on the back wheel and lost a lot of time replacing it and drilling it out and all this sort of stuff. And they tried to cut down through, instead of going down to Bombay and across to Madras, they cut straight down through all the villages and back roads to try and get to Madras before the cut-off time. And if you didn't get there before the cut-off time, which was about 8 hours after the last car, you didn't get your transport across to Malaysia, and then from Malaysia across to Perth. All your airfares, your cost of getting your car home was on you. So they were desperate to cut down, and they got bogged in this desert up on top of Pakistan, and a bus come along with 40 odd people on it, and George is throwing money at the people to come out and push. So the whole busload would get out and push them through this sand, Then they'd get back in, they'd go a few more 100 yards, get bogged again. More money, and they'd all get out and push them through this sand. And that must have been quite a sight to see those. They got to Madras with another crew, Ian and Mick Ellis from Bendigo, who we got to know, met them over there. Both had car yards in Bendigo, so they were great, trustworthy people, as you'd expect, owning a car yard, so car salesmen, and like myself. And they were going to win it. They had this Stetson Stanza, I think it was. Yeah. Anyway, they were for sure they were going to win the rally when they left London, but Mick went to sleep in after they got in the petrol stage in Yugoslavia and told Ian, "You come to a T-junction 100k, turn left." Okay, easy enough, mate. So Mick went to sleep. Ian got to the intersection and turned right, did 200 kilometres before Mick woke up, and they realised, so it's 400k back, which means that they were, rat shit virtually for the rest of the rally. And drove like hell to try and make up time. And in Yugoslavia, they didn't have white lines and little reflectors in the middle of the road. They used bricks. They have bricks on all the corners. And I don't know how many tyres they shredded hit these bricks. So they cut and run, and they actually got to Pakistan border between the Afghan border and Pakistan ahead of the field. So the first car through into Pakistan, and there were thousands, literally thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people lining the route. And when we got to Bombay, there were literally millions of people lining the route. So it was very popular with those in those two countries. But so they were first car, and everyone thought, of course, they're leading this rally, and that's what they loved. And but unfortunately, 5 motorbike riders got onto the route and come round the opposite other way, round a corner, hit them head on. One went through the windscreen and was killed. They were put in jail for 3 days. The motorcyclists were brought up before. Mick and Ian were exonerated. The government fixed the radiator on the car, and they tried to cut through down India, as I say, the same as George and his mates did. They met up, actually, and they got there late, missed out on it, but they were able to protest, as you probably know, and the protest couldn't be heard till they got to Sydney, so they were allowed back in the rally. So that was a good thing from their point of view, because they had service crews and everything waiting in Australia to follow them around, be part of this big rally. A couple of things coming through Iran. Someone asked me last night at the Toyota car club, what was the most scary thing that happened? Well, the first thing I thought of was we were warned not to take any photos in Afghanistan because of the situation with the government there. And so we left Tehran. We had another break in Tehran after Athens, probably 4,000 kilometres later. And in a traffic jam, I've never been in a traffic jam, you folk probably have here, but in Tehran, it was the capital there, it was horrendous. So we lost about an hour, and we get out to Tabriz, and then there was 200 kilometre salt desert up north to, from Yazd up to Tabriz. Salt desert with these forts built into the stark mountains on the side. And the little Corolla, the only way is, what sand's like in a low-powered car, you cannot pull 5th gear, sometimes 4th. In this case, we couldn't even pull 4th, you just keep slowing down through the pull of the sand on the wheels. So we did 200 kilometres in 3rd gear at 5,000 revs. It was the only way we could keep up our average to try and get to Tabriz on time. And this temperature gauge stayed right there, and it was that hot. It was, Brian Hilton, a Toyota dealer from Gosford in New South, he also was Peugeot. He had a Peugeot in London, Sydney, blew his head to smithereens. The car got that hot. Wormbolt in a Mercedes was leading the rally in that section, and his diff flew to bits. We pulled up and said we could do anything, and there's crown wheels and pinions and all over the road, and he said, no, just take this message to our service crew if you would. I think it was about 4 hours later we run into him somewhere and gave him a message, which meant he was out of the rally. But yeah, so we get to Briz, and it's only 50 kilometres to the Afghan border, and we're 4 minutes inside our time, so we had to keep the pressure on the little old Corolla to get there on time. In other words, it wouldn't have mattered if we'd missed the control, but it was a major control, and I think it was a 12-hour penalty. If you missed that, you could go and get the next one, but we didn't want to miss any if we could help it, so naturally. So by the time we, actually going back a bit, by the time we got to Athens, which was the first big break, we were something like 12 hours ahead of our next competitor in the Class A. So we knew then that all we had to do was play it cool and not do anything stupid, and we might get to the finish without much problem. But so that 5 kilometres from the Afghan border there's a big sign, probably the size of this opening here, with Afghanistan 5 kilometres. So I said to Noel, we'll pull up here and take a photo of the car under the sign. So we parked it there, and I got back excuse me, with my 8mm camera, and I've got probably an hour of the video, which is quite interesting, particularly when you get into India and see all these crowds trying to pull you up, get in front of the car, and you're driving at them at 30, 40 kilometres an hour, hoping they'll move out of the road, which fortunately they all did. So I took the photo, and I just sort of veered the camera around to this big fort, which was on the border, 5 kilometres away. Very hazy, hardly see it in the video, and jump in the car, off we go. We get down to the fort, and here's armed guards across the road pulled us up, and I'm not sure what sort of machine guns they had, but they looked awful deadly. So, and I get out there, camera, not in English, but whatever it was. I knew what they wanted, so I gave them the movie camera, and I said, told a little white lie, no, not fort, no, just take big sign. Yeah, just car, Afghanistan sign. Anyway, I must have worked a bit on the general or whoever he was, and he laughed a bit and he gave me the camera back, and I went round and shook every one of their hands, and they all sort of gave a bit of a laugh. Geez, we got that bloke in, didn't we, sort of thing. But I tell you what, that was probably the scariest thing. We weren't sure whether we'd be shot and dropped over the side and never heard of again. But then we get into Afghanistan, and there was a 200-kilometre-an-hour bitumen road right through to Kabul. Marvellous. It was put through during the war by the Americans, evidently, so we heard, the Second World War. And the government had stationed Afghani policemen every kilometre along the road to keep the public off the road. There were donkey carts, camel carts, horse and drays, people under one. There was only about 3 trees in every little town, and these poor beggars, and I reckon it would be 120 degrees at least, kept off the road by these policemen, which were 1 kilometre apart, and as they went past, they'd salute us. After a while, you'd salute back, but after about 50 kilometres, you didn't bother, couldn't be bothered. But that was marvellous, and it was only 3 weeks, we found out later, 3 weeks after we went through there, that the Russians attacked Afghanistan and took over. You may remember way back in that era, so we were a bit lucky to get through. Had tremendous rains in the mountains outside Kabul, come to a flooded river. Zazada, who was leading at that stage in a Porsche, Polish cavalry officer he was, Zazada, in this Porsche with big rails going down over the front and right up over the bonnet, about that far apart. Well, what you got that for? Oh, for kangaroo in Australia, kangaroo. So the kangaroo would be fly over the top, they thought. But he was there putting stones on the road. It was night time, and watching how the floods were receding in this creek. One of the Tiranas from Bega, Wally Glass, Peter Flanagan, they said, no, that's all right, it was okay. So they went through. They went past about 6 of us all waiting, and next minute they disappeared down the river. and had to be rescued by a grader or something a bit later that came along. So in the finish, we all got together and we'd help each other. Would be, say, a dozen drivers would be holding against the car as we drove across to stop it from going down. And but the river was receding, so I imagine the later entries probably wouldn't have had much trouble. So that was leaving Afghanistan. You got Pakistan. Then we went down the Khyber Pass, which was, you know, got a fascinating name, the Khyber Pass, and there's forts built into the side of the mountains, and you can imagine the old warriors coming out on their horses or whatever they had with their spears, but there was nobody there, so we were pretty safe. Through Pakistan into India, down to Bombay, where there was, as they said, a million people lining the route, 6 deep, black heads everywhere. If you couldn't have the window down, even though it was stinking hot, because they were throwing stones in the window with notes on. Please contact Steve, write to me, my name is such and such. I would like to be your pen pal. In some cases there was money, little, you know, worthless money tied to it. The car was full of these little stones, so you had to keep the windows up. One stage, there was nothing vicious. The only thing I struck at one stage was one bloke, and they were all leaning over the windscreen when you pull up at traffic lights, you know, looking in and heads everywhere. And one bloke grabbed the windscreen wiper and was going to, I thought, rinse it off perhaps for a souvenir. So I leaned out the window with my movie camera and I whacked him on the arm. Of course, the handle broke off the movie camera and the camera went flying into the crowd. A very nice Indian fella picked it up and handed it back to me. And of course, the batteries were in the handle, as you probably all know, but I was able to wire it up and keep on using it anyway after that, which was good. So we get to Bombay. We had I reckon it's about an 8-hour break there. And you know, on the video I've got leaving next, after the break, you can see the policemen flogging the people with, I don't know if they were whips, they were more like bamboo rods to keep them apart enough for us to be able to leave the impound area there. And they're all so happy, you know, they're all laughing and cheering. The coppers are whacking hell out of them, they're all laughing and carrying on. I love the Indian people. They were so generous and so happy, even in the outbox, way out in the middle of nowhere. And as I said, we went back 2 more times for the Himalayan Rally and made some good friends over there. In 1980 and 1980 we took that Celica there, and 84 we took the later model one, which Toyota had given me to prepare for a 63,000 kilometre rally around America. It was going to Prudhoe Bay, north of Alaska, right around down to Punta Arenas, bottom part of South America, right through a marvellous thing, but event. It was called the Marathon, 85 I think it was, and 85, no it must have been before that, 84, because I took it to India. Yeah, we got a telegram. You don't get telegrams nowadays, but we got a telegram to say the rally had been cancelled. The organiser had gone broke with their $8,000 entry fee, and $4,000 worth of tyres had already been sent to Los Angeles. I think they're still there. I don't know. I've never heard anymore. So we then entered. George and I decided we'd go to the Himalayan Rally, because the first ever Indian international rally, and they had Mrs. Gandhi as the patron of the rally, which to give them some credulence and so on. And Air India were the sponsors. They paid for the Celica to go in the hold of the jumbo. I couldn't believe we were sitting up in the jumbo and the cars below us. It was incredible, and paid for airfares and everything to go over and back, because we had expenses over there, but they were fairly minimal in India. I think we came 9th and won class or something or other. And Mrs. Gandhi presented the trophies. And just to show you quickly, just so you show you I'm not making it up. She actually shook my hand. This is George in the background, somewhere here, darkened out. Yeah, she's a lovely lady. Not that I've had much conversation with her, but it was a big thing, probably the biggest thing in my life, to meet a woman of the second most populous nation in the world, president of it. And unfortunately, when we went back 4 years later and did the Himalayan Rally, we were halfway through the rally. We were up at a little town called Mazur up in the mountains where the English used to go in the hot summer. They'd go up to these mountain towns, and it was like walking back 100 years in time, the whole hotel, shutters on the windows, and it was a marvellous experience. But we got there about 3 o'clock in the morning. We had a hotel organised on top of the hill. At about 8 o'clock next morning, no, it would have been 10 o'clock next morning, only probably an hour or so before we were due to leave again and head up higher, bashing on the door, and the news was Mrs. Gandhi's been assassinated. So that was a pretty big occasion in India, because the whole country went into pandemonium, really. Martial law was imposed, and people were getting murdered and shot and burnt to death and so on. It was pretty horrendous. And that was Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. It was 8 o'clock on Saturday night before I could get a phone call out of the country to tell Pauline that we were okay. Gee, I'm talking about London, Sydney, how we are in India. Anyway, we watched the funeral pyre and everything on the telly while we were locked in this hotel for a few days. We eventually got home, left the car there, but it came back. My Indian friends organised that a few weeks later in the plane. So here we go. We were heading across from Bombay to Madras, and one of the strangest things that ever happened to me, one of two things I can't explain, happened on that trip across there. It was just I think it was only about 1,500 kilometres or 1,800, a night run virtually across to Madras, where the cars were steam cleaned and put on the ferry to Malaysia, to Butterworth Air Force Base there. They were impounded. And I come over a hill. I was driving. We were tired. Noel was asleep. And here was a herd of cows and a shepherd. I can still see them vividly, all over the road. Nowhere to go, no hope. Probably doing 140, 150 with the turbo wound up and the jet engine going at the back on the Corolla. She was flat at 155 downhill, but and I said, well, this is it. I don't remember even hitting the brakes. I thought, well, there's no point. Too close, from here to the bar probably. And next minute, I'm out the other side and going, no, nothing happened. No, I still can't explain it. And I had a little recording device there, but took very little cassettes, and I put it on that, what had happened. So, as I did a lot of things during the event, just so you'd remember things that perhaps slipped your mind. But so that I just don't know what happened there, whether we took off and went over them or but anyway, we got to Madras. The cars were shipped to Penang, to Butterworth. We stayed in a pretty average 5-star place in Penang, the island there just off Butterworth. And then a couple of days later we headed down the peninsula to Singapore. Singapore Airlines put on a big splash for us there, big do. We then went, the cars were shipped from there to Perth. So then we flew Singapore Airlines to Perth, and my wife and daughter, Susie and Linda and Sean, came over. Hadn't seen them for probably 6 weeks, which was great. And then we did another 8,000 kilometres around Australia, right up to Cairns and round about, with a finish in Sydney at the Opera House. There was very little to do at the Opera House. It was a pretty low-key thing. Wilton Dixon presented the trophies in one of the rooms there, and there were only provisional results, of course, because of quite a few protests. There was no do or anything, so we heard this George Harris was having a party at his house in Pymble. And so 7 of us turned up in a taxi and got out this 3-storey house overlooking the harbour, 2 Rolls Royces down below and a couple of old vintage cars. And and we get upstairs and the waiters are serving us hors d'oeuvres and things, and we thought, this is a different world, what we're used to. And anyway, George was there in his usual blasé fashion, and so we talked to him a bit. And so it was 18 months later when I got a phone call to say, George Harris here, looking for a fella to come on the Mediterranean Rally with me. I've bought a Citroen that was come 7th in the London to Sydney Rally, and I've entered that in this rally round the Mediterranean. Do you want to come? I took quite a while to make up my mind, probably about 10 seconds, was it, Paula? And yeah, so that was a great event. It was very interesting. It was my job to keep the Citroen going. About every 4 hours something would go wrong with the thing and I'd have to try and fix it. And so that, yeah, the thing I was fascinated with was going into North Africa, which not many people get a chance to do. We crossed to Sicily by ferry, and then across to Tunis in Tunisia, and then into Algeria, and then into Morocco. Morocco, we lost all fluid out of our fluid suspension. A piston on the back left-hand corner collapsed, which meant we lost our power steering, our power brakes, and our suspension. So I filled it up with water. I blocked off that corner with a rivet or something or other, or a clamp, can't remember, and filled up with water. So we got our suspension and power steering and brakes back. The car had been getting hot, so we checked that and found the electric fans had stopped working. So I pulled the dash out, and being a factory-prepared Citroen, in France it was prepared there, it was so over-engineered you wouldn't believe. It looked like a wiring of a 747 behind the dash, so I just put it back again and run a couple of wires to the fan from the battery. Then we found as faster we went, the hotter it got, and the slower we got, the cooler it got. So you realise what happened there. I'd wired the fans back to front. So just changed the wires around, and we were right. We put a white post in under that back corner so that to keep the back up a bit. And I sat in that back corner to Tangiers, which was the roughest 400 kilometres I've ever been in my life, sitting on over a white post. But we got to Tangiers, only 4 hours late there, so we got the ferry across with the rest of them next day and had the piston fixed at a Citroen place and finished at Marseille later on that day. And I think we got about 5th or 6th, no, 9th, that's right. And that was only because a few outside of us had head-on crashes and staggered in a bit like Jeff Portman. Someone mentioned Jeff Portman's car there before, number 22 in Round Australia. Jeff rolled it 3 times and he still finished 22nd. Number 22, 22nd. It was a marvellous effort, I suppose. And have any of you seen the our video on the Repco Rally, the ABC documentary? Anyway, it's available on YouTube and it's quite interesting, and it shows his car held together by race tape, masking tape and whatever else. And also Bob Watson, Ross Dunkerton and someone else I can't think of were in London to Sydney, and I think Channel 7 in Perth sponsored them in a Peugeot, and they finished 6th or 7th or something. 5th. It was a marvellous effort anyway. Whatever. I've got it written down here. Gil. Well, Gil had a problem in Turkey, and we'd had a drink with Gil only a few hours before to control. The Leyland Terrier truck that followed Hans Sostrup had a heap of soft drinks that had Coca-Cola written all over it, and had Coca-Cola, had coffee and tea, and wherever he pulled up, we all gathered round and had cups of tea or whatever. And I'm pretty sure that's where last time I caught up with Gil before they had this accident, and were in 2 or 3 days behind after that. Who else do I know that was in it? Anyway, Bob Watson, of course. Bob was, I'm trying to think if he was in the London to Sydney, I'm pretty sure. Certainly in the Round Australia. And I'm disappointed I didn't catch up with Bob tonight, but at some stage we will. And the officers, they're not here? They are. Well, that's good. You're always the chiefs too, and I was always the Indians when you blokes were around. Yeah. I know you by association in that you were leaving when we were just getting in. So that was still. You got to have us fellas to make you people look good, you know. Otherwise, if you're running around on your own winning, it doesn't mean much, does it? But no, that's great. Yeah. So look, I've probably talked to you a fair bit here, or too much perhaps. But the Repco was probably the crowning glory in my experience, in the fact that with there was 167 of 208 entries, 167 started, so there was quite a few didn't make it to the start line. There was, I think it was 40, I've got it all written down here, but I have to put my glasses on to read it, 40 odd finished. Might have been more than that, because anybody who lost 100 hours was classed as a finisher, providing they clicked into most of the major controls. And 13 only did the whole course, of which 11, if my memory serves me correct, were factory cars. There was a Jackson in a Commodore come 13th. I'm pretty sure he was a private entry. We come 6th. We were a private entry, but all the rest were factory entries. So we were very pleased with our effort, and it was mainly due to the two navigators, and Ian Richards, Noel's brother, and Jeff Boyd. We did 700 metres more than the rally distance. That's all. So how's that for navigating in 20-odd thousand kilometres? They did a great job. So yeah. So the driver can't take a lot of credit. He can keep the car on the road, but they're the ones that keep you on the right road. And that was into a farmer's dam. That obviously the road had a lot of use, and we thought that's it. But in and out, and that was the most we did. We lost 4 minutes on transports, and that's so important too, because you spend a lot of time repairing the car when you've got a soft transport, so where you've got, plenty of time. Where you think you've got plenty of time, you might have 500 kilometres to do in 5 hours, in 6 hours, say. So you've got a quarter of an hour to fix a shocker or fix something, and you don't make it in time, and you lose points on transport. But I think the boys worked out we only lost 4 minutes on transports, which was pretty good. I think Brocky, Ian and Noel, we get together occasionally. I think they lost about 14 minutes on transports, and correspondingly lost time with the other crews too, Ferguson and as you know, the Ferguson comes second, and Checker Menta, the Kenyan, come third. Checker's a nice bloke. They come third. Fourth was Ross Duncan in the Volvo. Ross done a marvellous job. I remember him coming into Kununurra with a fuel tank on the roof and a pipe running down into the carby, and his rally jacket all black, and that where he'd beaten the fire out that had in the boot when he was trying to get the fuel pump working. And they still beat us into fourth. Fifth was Greg Carr in the Cortina, the only Ford factory car left running, because by the time they left Perth, all their engine mounts had broken, and the engines were sitting on the sump guard, big guards they had underneath, and because they rubbed through on the sump, and they were using more oil than petrol. They were literally pumping hundreds of gallons and gallons of oil into these engines to get them to Geraldton, where they were hopeful of getting them fixed, but Greg Carr's was the only one that was able to keep on going. Colin Bond, he pulled out before Darwin. Andrew Cowan was going well. As you know, Andrew won the first London Sydney in a Hillman Hunter, and he won this one. No, he won the next London Sydney in a Mercedes, and he pulled out. He was ahead of us at that stage. Anyway, Repco Rally. Yeah, you'll be able to look at it all on the YouTube if I've missed anything, and I have missed probably hours. But no, it's been great. It brings back a lot of memories, which, you know, you spend a bit of time preparing these things and trying to get your memory back into 40 years ago. But it does bring back the memories and times that you can't live again. And listen to you folk and all the things you've been doing, your get-togethers and your rallies and sprints and so on, it makes me think, oh, crikey. Pauline and I will get home and we'll start working on an old Falcon, eh? And Mitch there said to me before, how would we go in a rally now, Wes? How would you go in a rally now? I said, oh, they stop at night nowadays, and you know, you don't have to go for 50, 60, 70 hours at a time, and that'd suit me a bit better, as long as I got my sleep at night. So beware, next long distance event you folk hold, we might be in it. Okay.
Okay, right.
Good on you, Joel. Thank you.
Wes, that's magnificent, and we love hearing these stories. A lot of us go back some years, but I don't think any of us go back quite as far. So it's wonderful to hear this. I'm sure we've got a few questions. Whilst you're thinking of those, I might pose the first, and this is really directed to Paula. Paula, as a wife of a long-time rally competitor, I just wonder, the number of us do have wives still, and they still allow us to get out at night. I'm curious to understand how you managed when Wes was travelling overseas. Were you somewhat nervous about Wes's travel? You were. Excellent. All right. Any questions whilst I've got the microphone? We must have a couple of questions. Dolly?
Please.
Okay.
What was your most challenging area in Australia to run through?
Well, probably once we left Alice Springs to come back down to the Flinders Ranges. We'd been up the Gun Barrel Highway, sort of up through that way and into Alice Springs that way. And unbeknown to me, the back axle had cracked on the Corolla. I had known there was a weakness there, and I had actually strengthened it, where they bottom all the time, you know, with your heavy load of fuel on the back, and spares, of course, in the boot. I'd laid all the spares, like turret ends and things like that, on the floor of the boot beside this big fuel tank, and poured that foam in that you mix 2 parts of foam, and in those days, and it poured it in, and within 30 seconds it sets hard. So all the spares were buried in this foam. So you just need a knife to get it out. You didn't have to tie it down or bolt it down. And the constant bottoming actually put a lot of strain on the outside of the axle, and they used to crack just inside the spring hanger. And so we knew this was terrible. It was one of the worst roads in Australia in those days from Alice. There was bitumen for 297k out of Alice, south, and then right down to Kimber or Pimber or one of those. I think it was shocking gravel, terrible. That's where Peter Brock left the road at one stage, I think, and nearly lost a rally over it, but fortunately didn't hit anything and was able to continue. But so we flat as a tack to try and make up time so we could take it easy on this rough stuff. So the little car was 155, flat out all the time. And we got onto the gravel. We'd only done 3 or 4 kilometres, and we hear this terrible rattle in the back. So I slowed down, opened the driver's door, had a look out the back, and here's the back wheel going in and out like that. So we stopped, and what had happened, the crack had obviously developed and broken right through. So the only thing that was holding the axle together was the spring. Naturally, you got the leaf spring go right through the with about that much axle on the inside, and the rest of it through there. And oil starting to run out, of course. And well, that's it. No, we're begged. We've come all this way, and that's it. And he said, "Well, hang on. There's a homestead here, not far away." He said, Mount Emu, I think it was called. Anyway, so we crawled along, and you wouldn't believe, and this is how luck favours the poor, I might say. Within 200 or 300 metres, there's a big gates and a homestead over on the right, and a big shed over on the left. So we crawled in there, and there was 3 cars parked outside the shed, and we drove around it, and there's a blinking old side-whacker Ford V8 motor driving a electric welder and 3 blokes welding up gates. The arc welders going as we pulled up. "What do you want?" "Oh, no, because they all run over. Told them what we want. They helped us out. They got a crowbar and held the wheel in against the broken bit in against the diff. I got underneath and I welded it all round. And "Got any bolts, fellas?" "Yeah, some old bolts here." We laid them on the top and welded them up, and put oil in. We had oil in the back, and put oil back in the diff, and never touched it again till Adelaide. So that's how lucky you can be, isn't it? Hey, yeah. I don't know whether that answered your question of rough or not, but certainly the most luckiest anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, where's these nice photos up the front? There's a jig on the left-hand side of the car. How did you do that?
We looked after it pretty well. Yeah, I should have mentioned the posters. Toyota did come to the party on both events after we won. You know, we first private entry home in that one, and second in the class, because that blinking Ross Duncan beat us in that class, and we won the class in that. In both cases, they rang up and said, "We'll pay all your expenses, providing we can advertise it, you know, the win." I said, "Yeah, of course. That's what I'm doing it for Toyota, for ourselves, etc." So we got all our money back, 14,000 for the London to Sydney, and 26,000, I think it was, back for the budget on the Repco, including about $8,000, I think, in prize money for the Repco, for various Armstrong shock absorbers had you 500, and Sibby lights give you another 500, and Piranha electronic ignition gave you another 500 if you had Piranha electronic ignition, which I'd never had before, but it was marvellous. So yeah, and so these are the posters that Toyota did and sent out to all the dealers, and of course some of that were in the papers, Herald Sun and so on, in the months after that. And all the dealers that did help me in money, the ones that gave me some 200 or some 300, when I raised the 4,400 towards the costs, I gave them the car, the Corolla, for their showroom for a fortnight each, and try and make up for the fact they helped us out with the money. So that was appreciated, and I think they appreciated that. The only other thing was Managing Director Mel Webster came to the airport when we were leaving to go to London. Noel and I are down there ready to get on, and Mel came out with a cheque for $1,000, and that was marvellous because they didn't sponsor motorsport, as I said, in any way, and he did that off his own bat. Whether it come out of his pocket or not, I don't know, but anyway, that paid for our insurance. When we got over there, we found we had to pay $1,000 for an insurance policy. So that was very helpful there. Yeah, so, and the car, unfortunately, I was thinking about it when you mentioned about this event, marvellous idea. I sold it to a chap in Melbourne. I was competing in the Begonia Rally quite a few years later, and the bloke came and said, "You want to sell it?" And for some silly reason I said, "Oh yeah, might do that, yeah. 3,500. He said, "Yeah, okay, I'll buy it." Can't think of his name. I've looked it up recently. I followed it up with Vic Rhodes to see if it was still around a few months ago, but it disappeared off the registrar 10 years ago. The registration thing. It still could be under club plates, perhaps. I don't know, but Unfortunately, that disappeared, and the Repco one I gave to my son Sean because Toyota had given me this next one, the one that Amy's got now, and I didn't need it as his first or second road car, wasn't it, Paul? I think. You know, I had the roll cage and everything in. Oh, I didn't tell you about the dent. There was a kangaroo, of course. And there's another one in the front corner, and all happened in Australia, up the Immaculate. Yeah, sure, and Sean was out to party at Manu with some friends to stay over the night, and one of his mates next day said, "Oh, Sean, can I take your rally car for a run?" "Yeah, of course you can," says Sean. They didn't get round the first corner, and that was it, yeah. Over she went, so it was wrecked after that, pulled to bits, someone took the roll cage and other people took other parts, and that was, unfortunately, I wish I still had that one.
There was a question up the back here.
Did you have a favourite car?
Favourite car?
Rally car or?
Rally car.
Well, I've probably only had half a dozen. Probably the Corolla did the best job of the lot. You know, for a little car to do what it did, not a thing went wrong with it. You know, it never used any oil, never did any problem. Someone asked me that question last night, but it was generally, and I said it was a Rambler Javelin that we had in 1970. Anyone know a Rambler Javelin? I think it was 6.8 V8, 4 miles to the gallon. Never under 150 kilometres an hour, and that's why I sold it in the finish. Kids were growing up, and Pauline, and I must thank Pauline too. I've never had a chance to publicly thank her for spending all those hours while I was away, and she probably doesn't think I appreciate it, but looking after those 3 beautiful kids. Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Yes?
What was the quality of fuel like on the London to Sydney in the Afghanistan and Turkey and those places?
Yeah, good question, because that was one worry we had, because we'd heard of the bad quality of fuel, and I don't know whether it was a silly thing to do. It didn't turn out to be a silly thing, but because of that fact that we'd heard, very low octane in some countries, particularly Iran, would you believe it, where most of the oil comes from. I pulled the head off in London and I put 2 head gaskets on it, which probably reduced the performance a little bit. I'm not sure how much would have dropped the compression, but for that reason. But in retrospect, we really didn't notice any pinging or any problems. It just that salt section in Iran I was telling you about, just at Yazd, YAZD, we were running a bit short of fuel because of the traffic jam in Tehran a few hours earlier. So we pulled into this place that sort of looked like a service station, and the fella comes out, "Oh yeah, you get your petrol, yeah." Oh. And it's 4-gallon drums, punch a hole in it and put a spout in it and dip her in the back. I thought, God knows what's in those drums. But anyway, it was okay. We got through and it was no problem. But no, that's it never struck full petrol or dirty petrol. So we're pretty lucky there. Yep.
Fantastic. Wes, thank you very much. We've much appreciated your words, and it's not often that we get to hear the history going back all those years. So on behalf of the HRA, we'd like you to take a drop of HRA Red. You're going to enjoy that. You can bottle it for at least a day, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So round of applause for Wes Nalders.
Thanks, mate. Good on you.
Thank you very much.